Hey, warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Discuss Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We got a chat today as we're going to be chatting with Curtis Rogers. He does such an amazing job over at 710 Seattle Sports. We're going to be talking with him about just what we've seen this college basketball offseason in terms of more of these mid-major teams. We're going to be taking a look at what we've all got out there in the WCC, the new look WAC with Stephen F. Austin moving on over to the Southland, what that means for the Seattle Redhawks out there. We're going to be talking about those teams that were the Pac-2 pretty much in Oregon State, along with Washington State, heading on over to the WCC. So lots of mid-major chatter there. We're going to be talking a little bit about one or two teams out there on the East Coast as well, but we're going to be also chatting about how realignment is just making things more murky for these road teams and how much more difficult it's going to be able to pull off road wins in the Big Ten, in the ACC, these little conferences. So we're going to have some fun there and trying to be able to find some ways to be able to get you guys some good information here in the offseason now that the player movement is relatively done. We did not see any player news that happened on Thursday, so don't have a lot of news and notes with regards to that. So we're just going to be having the chat with Curtis after I take my one mandatory break here in like 2 to 3 minutes. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. And please do fire these in because I do want to know what you want to hear on this podcast. I have no way of knowing that unless if you fire in these Twitter/X questions, and you've got one of two ways to be able to do so. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at JN_41. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Additionally, conference previews are going to be continuing. Plan on doing the Summit League sometime during the weekend, so be on the lookout there. We're already through north of half of the conferences, and well, I can't just do a conference preview every single day at this point because we'd be done with them by early September, and then we would really be just twiddling our thumbs, and I always like to wait on the bigger conferences until the back half of the offseason just because they have the most moving parts. You sometimes have a few guys that reclassify. We've seen that quite a bit already throughout the offseason as well, so that's why I wait on those conferences a little bit more. So please do send in those Twitter/X questions, but in the meantime, we're going to have a great chat with Curtis on the flip side here on Cuts Seats with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Seats, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it's always great to be joined by this man as Curtis Rogers. He does such a great job over at 710 Seattle Sports, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Coupled with that, if it's happening out there in the Pacific Northwest, he's doing an incredible job of covering it all, whether that's the Seattle Kraken, the Seattle Mariners, the Seattle Seahawks, obviously the Washington Huskies, and so much more. You're able to catch him on Twitter/X, along with his Instagram feed at A Kid From Kent altogether. And Curtis, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, always happy to hop on, talk some college hoops, no matter the time of year. And like you said, we're getting closer and closer, inching closer and closer to October, November, when things really ramp up. I'm super excited for this year's college basketball season. I feel like it's a very open field for what could be whatever, team is cutting down the nets in March. Obviously, UConn's still there. So they're not going anywhere. But it is going to be a really fun season coming up here. And I think there's going to be a lot of great teams, especially as we see more and more kids return to school with NIL and the earning opportunities they have rather than going pro.
Yep, it is going to be really interesting to see what we get. I do want to address the fact that the WAC is going to be looking a little bit different than we thought. As for the WAC, certainly Grand Canyon is going to be over there along Seattle, and they move out after this year. But effective for this season, no more Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin, no more UT Rio Grande Valley. And, well, if you thought UT Rio Grande Valley was going to win the conference, I don't know what to tell you there. But I feel like Stephen F. Austin leaving the conference does make it a little bit more open for those number 2 and number 3 spots out in a WAC where, for Seattle, they've really been able to do a nice job of being in the upper half of the conference this season. Now I think the question is, can they kick the door down?
Yeah, that's been the biggest question with that program, really, since they've returned to the D1 level over a decade ago. The departure of Stephen F. Austin, I think that is going to make for a much more open field. They've always kind of been there. I mean, they've made a few NCAA tournaments over the last few years. Obviously, Grand Canyon is kind of the class of the WAC, but they're set to leave with Seattle U following this season for the WCC. But like you said, I think this is kind of Seattle U's opportunity here. If they want to make the NCAA tournament, I mean, you're going to have no better shot than right now to do so, because once you head to the WCC, it is going to be very tough sledding. You're going to be facing a lot of uphill battles. The competition ramps up. You can write in Sharpie, Gonzaga is going to get at least an at-large bid every single year. St. Mary's is right there with Gonzaga in terms of at least consistently making the NCAA tournament. And the WCC has never really been a conference that's been, a 4 or 5 bid league or anything like that. They've been consistently like 2 to 3 bids every single season. So there's just not a whole lot to go around in that conference. Now, maybe, they get a little bit more respect. I think they've had some really good teams in years past. But right now, I think the WCC is a conference that still is kind of looking for the respect outside of Gonzaga and St. Mary's. I don't know if they're going to get it quite yet. And potentially, best case scenario for Seattle U and moving to the WCC is if Gonzaga were to go to the Big 12 or something like that, then you have more opportunities for other schools in that conference to win. Now, you would be losing your biggest draw. You'd be losing your biggest revenue generator in terms of NCAA tournament units, but you would have a better shot at making the NCAA tournament if a team like Gonzaga were to move on to bigger and better pastures. But right now, it feels like this one final season in the WAC is Seattle U's best shot at making the NCAA tournament for the foreseeable future.
Yep, it certainly is going to be interesting to see what we get out of a Seattle team that, no doubt about it, they're going to be in a little bit of transition after last season. They had so many guys like Tyson and company in that backcourt that were able to do a rock solid job on offense. As joining me on the show, we do have Curtis Rogers of 710 Seattle Sports right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. But I do take a look at what Chris Victor has been able to do, and I feel like bringing back some of these guys like a Paris Dawson, bringing in Malik Arrington, Matthew Alexander Moncrief, who was a part of that Oklahoma State team that made a run in the 2020 NCAA tournament. He has been around for quite a while. I do feel like this is a team that out there in a WAC where it's Grand Canyon and everyone else, I do think that they could be very competitive for this upcoming season. And I do think that just really the entire state of the West Coast mid-major basketball landscape is a very good one.
Yeah, I think so too. There's going to be a lot of great teams in the Mountain West. There's going to be a lot of great teams in the WCC and the WAC. And you mentioned Chris Victor and just kind of the job that he's been able to do. He has been just so rock steady in his time since taking over for Jim Hayford a couple of years ago. Inherited a really sticky situation because he took over right before the season started just a few years ago and led that Redhawks team to nearly an NCAA tournament berth. I think he has been one of the most slept on coaches out west right now. I think he is a coach that should very much be in consideration for bigger jobs if they were to open up. I know with Seattle U moving to the WCC, that's a good move for him. He doesn't have to do anything if he wants to step up in terms of conference quality. But Chris Victor's a guy that I know he interviewed for the Washington State job, which ended up going to David Riley, another really good young head coach out here on the West Coast. But I think Chris Victor's a guy that if you are in need of a young coach, an energetic coach, one that can draw up some plays, one that can really out-scheme his opponent, it's him. He has really, really impressed me in his years in that Redhawks ball club. So keep an eye out for that name in next year's coaching carousel, especially out here on the West Coast as maybe some jobs open up. But I really think that he is somebody that if a bigger school came calling, they could do a lot worse than him. I'll tell you that right now. He is one that I really enjoy watching coach.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's also going to be interesting because we are talking about some of these West Coast mid-majors as to the new conference that Seattle's going to be going to next year in the WCC, because we have seen a lot of changes in that conference over the next few seasons. And this is going to be perhaps short-term, perhaps long-term, but Washington State and Oregon State being in that conference, I think is so much fun. And certainly when it comes to Oregon State, I don't know if there's too much I'd be able to help out that team. If they go to the NEC, I think they might be able to make the NCAA tournament, but yeah, that would be a lot of travel in general. But How do you take a look at the WCC for this upcoming season? Because as we know, it's Gonzaga, it's St. Mary's. Now I feel like it's Washington State and San Francisco, though, as the Dons have been slept upon a little bit, but they're a team that made the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago, and I really like what they've been able to do in recent years as well.
Yeah, the Dons are an interesting program because they've been able to really just kind of plug and play at head coach over the last, half decade or so and haven't really skipped a beat. I think Gonzaga is far and away the best team in the WCC. I think they are going to be a national title contender this season, bringing back so many guys from last year's ball club. And then bringing in Michael Ajayi, comes over from another WCC program in Pepperdine. Pepperdine going through a lot of changes with Lorenzo Romar no longer there. They lose their best player, Michael Ajayi, who I think was on a lot of people's NBA draft boards as well. He's been a bit of a late bloomer. He comes from the Seattle area, actually my neck of the woods, out here in Kent, Washington. He was a guy in high school who was not necessarily viewed as a top prospect. He went the JUCO route for a couple of years, then latched on at Pepperdine with Lorenzo Romar, and really has blossomed into a phenomenal player, a really key player on those Pepperdine teams over the last couple of years. I'm excited to see what he can do with Gonzaga, this Gonzaga team, getting all these guys back. They bring Steele Venters is going to be playing too this season after he missed all of last year with an injury, getting that medical red shirt. So I look at Gonzaga as sort of the class of the WCC right now, but I think, it is going to be a 4-horse race between them, St. Mary's, I think Washington State. Even though they look very different from last year's team, no Miles Rice, no Isaiah Jones, no guys like that, no Jalen Wells, they still have talent there. They were able to hit the transfer portal and hit it hard, bringing in a few guys from Eastern Washington, an Eastern Washington program that has had a lot of success in the Big Sky Conference, haven't been able to pay it off with an NCAA tournament berth the last 2 seasons because of a couple of choke jobs in the conference tournament, but that's a good program to get talent from. And I mean, David Riley has had that program roaring and ready to go over the last couple of years. He brings all that over to the Palouse, over to Pullman. I think Washington State, I don't think there's going to be as significant of a drop off as I think a lot of people think with the Cougs, with losing Kyle Smith and losing so much talent from that NCAA tournament team. I think they're going to be a very formidable opponent in that WCC. I think that fan base is going to be recharged after the season that they had this last year. I think Beasley Coliseum is going to be a good home court advantage for them, which hasn't necessarily been the case over the last few years, but it was good to see that building fill up near the end of the season last year.
Yep, they were able to make that NCAA tournament run, and Kyle Smith being out, that is going to hurt them a little bit, but I feel like they did a nice job of being able to replace him, and I do think that moving forward, we are going to be seeing some really good basketball out there in the WCC and just nationwide. How do you take a look at these realigned conferences? Because I do think that it is so big that in the WCC, they keep that geographical footprint with having all these teams out here on the West Coast. Well, we're going to be seeing the Big Ten adding those Pac-12 teams, certainly the Big 12, the ACC going through that as well. I do think that it's going to make those conferences just a little bit more interesting and just a home court advantage mean more and more in those conferences, whereas I feel like road teams in these mid-major conferences just stand a little bit more of a fighting shot.
I think that's a great point you bring up because the travel miles that they're going to be racking up in the mid-major conferences are nowhere near the same as what they're going to be racking up in the Power 5, I guess. Obviously, we consider the Big East to be a power conference in college basketball, but you look at, like you said, the footprint of the WCC, the footprint of the WAC, the footprint of a lot of these smaller conferences are still very much together geographically. You're not going to see much difference in travel for a team like Seattle U when they go from the WAC to the WCC. Meanwhile, teams like Washington, teams like Oregon, USC, UCLA, they're going to be traveling to Piscataway, New Jersey. They're going to be traveling to Maryland. They're going to be traveling to Penn State. Those are big road trips going over multiple time zones. You're not going to have the comforts of home really anywhere close to being home. And I mean, that is going to be a really, really tough slog for a lot of these teams where I do kind of wonder come NCAA tournament time, could mid-major teams have a bit of an advantage in terms of not just being gassed at the end of the season because their travel has been a little bit lighter, been a little bit easier. Now, I get that a lot of these power conference schools are traveling pretty cushy, traveling charter flights and maybe flying private, but still, air travel takes it out of you. And I think regardless of how cushy your travel experience is, you're still flying, 5-6 hours across country to play these games. And then you're flying 5-6 hours back to your home campus. It is not going to be easy for a lot of these teams. I just think of like Cal and Stanford playing in the ACC. They have nobody near them. The closest team to them is SMU. And that's pretty crazy to say that SMU is in the ACC as well. Their travel schedule is going to be nuts too. So I think a lot of these teams that latched on in terms of conference realignment that are not really near the geographic center of their conference, I think they could be in for a bit of a rude awakening. It was good to see the Big 12 kind of keep everybody together in terms of geography. The four corner schools probably not going to have as big of a travel headache as the other schools in the Pac-12 that decided to depart.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I think that it's going to be so interesting to see how that old mountain road trip in the Pac-12 is going to be playing in the Big 12 as well, because that tripped up everyone in the Pac-12 for so long, and even though Colorado probably not going to be the same team that they were 8 seasons ago, that is going to be a lot of fun to be able to take a look at as well. As Curtis Rogers, who does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports, is shown to be on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just as you take a look this offseason, as you've been diving in, taking a look at these teams, is there a team or two that you just are starting to take a look at and you're starting to feel a little bit better about them as the offseason goes along?
Yeah, I think one team that I'm feeling a little bit better about right now, as we have seen the transfer portal kind of slow down a little bit. I'm looking at, in the Big East, one team that, I mean, it's obvious that they are just kind of looking to take that next step forward. I really like Rick Pitino in St. John's this season. I don't know why, but I just feel like a coach of that stature being able to get another year of recruits under his belt, hit the portal hard. I know last year he made a lot of complaints. I believe at one point he called it the most unenjoyable experience of his life, coaching in the 2023-2024 season. He's never been one to shy away from how he's feeling, but I think St. John's is a team that if things go right for them, the Big East is such a tough conference for sure, but it is hard to pick against Rick Pitino, and just I think he's building something. I don't know necessarily what the ceiling of a St. John's program could be. I think a lot of people have kind of wondered if maybe they're a sleeping giant. We've seen them have good seasons in years past with, Chris Mullen and Ron Artest and those programs, Mark Jackson as well, but there just kind of seems to be maybe this lid on top of the program. But if there's a coach that can push that lid off the jar, it's going to be Rick Pitino. I have a lot of belief in him, even though, he's always been a really, I guess, slimy guy in years past. He has always kind of left a weird trail, especially his time at Louisville. But you know what? In college basketball, you kind of have to be one of those guys if you want to win big. You got to recruit big, you got to do all that. So I think St. John's is a team that I'm definitely going to be watching with a lot of interest this season, especially because of just the expectations that having somebody like Rick Pitino run your program can really bring.
Yep, and we were mentioning travel as well. A little bit less travel out there in the Big East than what we're going to be seeing out there in the Big Ten and so many of these other conferences. And a man that whether he's at home, whether he's on the road, what have you, he's always firing all cylinders. That'd be you, Curtis. You do such a great job. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of basketball. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, we're gearing up for this year's college basketball season. SeattleSports.com is where you want to go for all of our content, keeping tabs on the Zags, keeping tabs on the Huskies, the Cougs, the Eastern, Seattle U, what have you. Like we've talked about plenty of times, Greg, coaching searches galore over here. New coaches at Eastern, new coaches at Wazoo, new coaches at UW. I mean, it is a brand new era of college basketball up here in the Northwest, and we're really excited for this upcoming season. I'm excited to join you throughout the season on this podcast because I have a ton of fun talking this great game that we love. And so I'm ready for the season to start. Even though it is still technically summer, I'm ready to go indoors and watch some college hoops.
The weather is hot, but things are also heating up in terms of the upcoming college basketball season as well. Curtis is ready for it, and I'm ready for it as well. A big thanks to Curtis Rogers of 710 Seattle Sports for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever for this podcast, and I sure hope that you do. Please send them in one of two ways. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Jaden_41. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. And I'm with you guys all 366 days this year, regular season, off season. Like I said, conference previews, they are continuing. Doing the Summit League sometime this weekend. We'll try to get things on lockdown with regards to the Sun Belt next week. And then from there, we are really flying with these conference previews. You get the SWAC, the W schools, and then we get into the bigger conferences. So there's a lot to do here in the offseason to get you set for what is hopefully going to be the most profitable season ever in college basketball. And I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.